Good morning, everybody. Shana Tova. This past January, shortly before coronavirus canceled all of our travel, I went to Poland as part of an interreligious trip to Auschwitz-Birkenau. The trip was planned and led by Dr. Mohammed Al-Isa, Secretary General of the Muslim World League based in Mecca, David Harris, CEO of American Jewish Committee in New York, with Rabbi David Rosen, AJC's Director of International Interreligious Relations, based in Jerusalem. In May of 2018, Dr. Al-Isa had visited the Holocaust Museum in DC and wrote, "Muslims around the world have a responsibility to learn about the Holocaust." Soon after that, he met with David Harris, and they agreed to lead a joint Muslim-Jewish delegation to Auschwitz for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the camp in 1945. Dr. Al-Isa thought the trip was so important that he assembled 62 prominent Muslim leaders from over 28 countries. They included 25 religious leaders, as well as scholars, businessmen, and politicians. It's not obvious what any of them had to gain from coming. Rather, each of them took a risk in participating with AJC in a high-profile visit, acknowledging the Holocaust and mourning the loss of lives of Jews. Dr. Al-Isa's authority at the head of the organization that speaks to and for millions of moderate Muslims worldwide provided some encouragement to participate and some religious and political cover. The Jewish delegation was much smaller, 20 in all, mostly professional and lay leaders from AJC. Several of the Jewish participants were relatives of survivors or victims of the camps. We were also joined by the chief rabbi of Poland. As soon as we arrived at the camp and stood under the infamous entrance gate, everyone was very quiet. Our outstanding guide started with a brief introduction to Auschwitz-Birkenau, especially oriented to the Muslim visitors. He handed Dr. Al-Isa a list of the names of 50 Muslims who had been among the 1.1 million people killed there. As we walked through the exhibits, I found myself thinking about both the victims and the perpetrators of the horrors that had taken place there. I felt crushed by the loss of so many men, women, and children, families, and whole communities wiped off the face of the earth. At the same time, I felt the tragedy of the regular, unexceptional people who created and operated this camp to kill people by the hundreds of thousands. How did shopkeepers and teachers, doctors and engineers become mass murderers? It seemed to confirm the existence of an instinct in man, a willingness to dehumanize people who are in some way different. I found that terribly depressing. If the killing was somehow instinctive, it didn't seem like something that could be understood and prevented. I could see never forget as a realistic goal, but I was pessimistic about getting to never again, especially in a world increasingly marked by a return to tribal fighting. Despondent and frightened, every muscle in my body twisted into a knot. I walked outside in the cold and damp, past the remains of the incinerators, and saw Dr. Al-Isa in his gold-trimmed long black robe with rubbers over his desert shoes. He was walking with his entourage along the paved walkway to the monument at the far end of Birkenau. I wondered what they were thinking about the horrible acts that were remembered in this museum. Then one young Muslim man came over to me and asked if I was Jewish. When I said I was, he said quietly, "I'm so sorry." He had no role in the Holocaust, either as a perpetrator or a victim. Our clothes, language, religion, everything marked us as members of different tribes, and yet he felt my pain. Not only did he feel it, but he was moved to share with me in a strange language and an even stranger place that he understood and he cared. So that was part of the answer to my sadness and loss of hope. It was a simple but profoundly reassuring act of empathy. My knotted muscles began to relax. I looked with appreciation at this group of people who had felt the need to travel long distances, some at great risk to themselves and their families, to draw public attention to the crimes committed against my tribe and memorialized at Auschwitz. This seemed to represent another human instinct, empathy, to recognize and acknowledge the feelings of others, even those who are very different. On the open square in front of the memorial, the Jews and Muslims of our group gathered to light memorial candles. Rabbi Rosen said Kaddish. Dr. Al-Isa spoke movingly. To be here among the children of Holocaust survivors and members of the Jewish and Islamic communities is both a sacred duty and a profound honor. I was touched. I reminded myself that he was a politician in a theocratic autocracy. I reminded myself that he could be doing a lot of other things, easier things, but he was there in cold, damp Poland. Then he led his delegation in afternoon prayers. Slowly and devoutly, they knelt and touched their heads to the ground there in Auschwitz-Birkenau, in front of a memorial to all those who had been killed by Nazis.